Welcome to video 3 and the last video lecture in this series on project appraisal. The next project appraisal technique we are going to look at is the internal rate of return, popularly known as the IRR. So the IRR, or the internal rate of return, is the rate of return at which the NPV is zero. Meaning that once you've computed the IRR and you discount the cash flows which resulted into that IRR, you're going to get an NPV of zero. How do we use the IRR? If the IRR is greater than the cost of capital, the project should be accepted, because this suggests that the NPV is positive at that cost of capital. The IRR can be estimated by using linear interpolation, simply meaning that it is basically a trial and error calculation. We use the following formula: IRR equals L, where L represents the lower discount rate, plus in brackets NL, NL being the NPV of at the lower discount rate, over NL minus NH, NH being the NPV at higher discount rate, close brackets times open brackets H being the higher discount rate minus the lower discount rate. You have to compute two NPVs. As you can see, you've got an NPV at the lower rate and an NPV at the higher rate. So you have to compute two NPVs. The rule of thumb is this. Most questions will give you the first discount rate. After you use it, and if your NPV is positive, you need a higher discount rate from the one you've been given to get the negative NPV. Sometimes you may not get a negative NPV, but as long as you've used a high discount rate, you can go ahead and substitute in the formula, you still get the correct answer. There will be variations in rounding off, but that should not be a problem. If the first discount rate gave you a negative NPV, then you want a lower discount rate from the one which has given you the negative NPV. So try and go 5 steps up or 5 steps down. Advantages of the internal rate of return. It is readily understood concept. It does not require an exact cost of capital. Its advantages: it's a relative measure or relative return. It's not absolute, meaning it's a percentage. Another disadvantage is that it may rank projects incorrectly. To follow through with the Kibi's project example, we had earlier discounted at 10%. We had earlier discounted the cash flow at 10%, which gave us a positive NPV of 32,025. So since the NPV is positive at 10%, so we need a discount rate which is higher than 10%, so we got 15%. So at 15%, we get a negative NPV of 34,625. Remember the formula, it's a negative here, so negative and negative becomes positive. So that's how that changes to a positive, because the negative and the minus becomes positive. So the cost the IRR is 12.5%. Since 12.5% is higher than the initial 10% cost of capital that were given in the question, then we'll accept this project. So basically your IRR will always be in between the lower discount rate and the higher discount rate. So sometimes in the multiple choice you don't need to actually calculate. You could actually guess a correct answer by looking at the rates that are given in the solutions. That is, if only one of the solution is higher than the lower rate but lower than the higher rate, that will most likely be your answer. We noted earlier as we discussed NPV that NPV requires relevant cash flows. So we need to understand what relevant cash flows. A relevant cash flow is a future cash flow arising as a direct consequence of a decision. These are the costs which should be used in investment appraisal or when making decisions. In order for a cost to be a relevant cost, it must fulfill certain criteria. The first one is that it must be a future cost or a future cash flow. Because it is a future cash flow, then it will have a bearing on the decision which is to be made. A cost which has already been incurred cannot be a relevant cost because it has already been incurred, so you cannot do anything about it. So costs which have already been incurred are also known as sunk costs. A sunk cost is not a relevant cost. Some costs may not have been incurred, but they may have been committed because they are subject to legally binding contracts. So even if no payment has already been done, has already been made, but because they are binding, you've already committed yourselves, so committed costs are also irrelevant. They are not relevant, even though there will be cash flows which will happen in the future. Another relevant cost is an incremental cost. An incremental cost is a relevant cost which arises as a direct consequence of a decision. So only costs which will differ under some or all of the available opportunities should be considered. We've already touched on cash flows, that a relevant cost should be a cash flow. So costs or charges which do not reflect additional cash inflows or spending should be ignored for the purpose of decision making. The following are not relevant costs. Depreciation, even though we use it in accounts as an expense, is not a relevant cost. Notional rent or interest also is not a relevant cost. All overheads absorbed, that is fixed overheads absorbed, these are irrelevant. So what this means is that all avoidable differential and opportunity costs will be relevant costs. Sunk costs, committed costs, and notional costs, these will not be relevant costs and should not be included in decision making. We look at our last example. A company is calculating the relevant cost of undertaking a special contract which requires 300 liters of material A and 200 liters of material B. The following data is available. Material A, we have in inventory 100 liters. The historical cost per liter was $3. The current purchase price per liter is $4. Material B, we have in inventory 200 liters. The historical cost per liter was $8. The current purchase price per liter is $7.50. Both materials are held in inventory as they are regularly used by the company for normal production. Since they are regularly used, it means that once we take them out of inventory, we need to replace them. Since they are regularly used, it means that once we take them out of inventory, we need to replace them. We need 300 liters of material A, so we are going to buy the whole 300 liters at the current purchase price of $4, which gives us a total cost of $1,200. B, even though we have the 200 that we need in inventory, since it is regularly used, we have to replace the 200 once we use the one in inventory. We're going to replace it at the current purchase price of $7.50. So 200 liters times 7.50 gives us 1,700. So our total relevant costs will be 2,700. If the inventory was not regularly used, if the materials were not regularly used but they were in inventory because they had been bought in excess at some point, then the relevant cost was going to be the opportunity cost of selling that material, since after taking it out of inventory there was going to be no need of replacing it. I'll repeat. If the inventory was held in inventory because it was excess what was acquired at some point, and if we take it out of inventory to use it on the new project, there will be no need to replace it. The relevant cost was going to be the opportunity cost of selling it, how much we could realize if we are going to dispose it as scrap. So read the questions carefully again as you look at calculating what the relevant costs are. You may also be asked to compute the relevant cost of labor. Labor, you look at the capacity. Do you have extra capacity, or are you working at full capacity? If you're working at full capacity, it means for you to undertake the project, then you need to either hire more labor or move the labor from where they are, the current labor, you need to move them to the new project. So that brings us to the end of project appraisal. It can be a tough topic with tricky calculations, but they are not all that difficult if you practice. So what you need now is to try and practice as many questions as you can. You have a lot of questions in the SCCA revision kit, so pick any SCCA revision kit and where there is investment appraisal, and practice as many questions as you can. And just bear in mind that this topic keeps on building up. You meet it in MA, you're going to meet it in financial management, you're going to meet it in advanced financial management. So it's one topic that you want to have at your fingertips. It's not a topic you want to learn and forget, because it will still crop up in future exams. Thank you for your time.